All right. So today we're here with Pat Allan, who is the maintainer of Thinking Sphinx and the purveyor of Flying Sphinx, which is an add-on at Heroku for search. And he's currently serving as the CTO and co-founder of a small start. I wouldn't call it a startup, I guess. What'd you call it? A
A social
social
enterprise.
enterprise called
Yeah,
Limber.
yeah,
Pat, can you go ahead and talk a little bit about yourself? Give a real quick history, your background, your location, history, that kind of
sure.
stuff, and let us know how you got here.
Okay. Um, Primarily, I'm a Ruby developer. So Thinking Sphinx, as you mentioned, that's a Ruby gem. Um, and I've been a professional Ruby developer for, it'll be 10 years at the end of this year. So we've got another month. Um, Prior to that, I was a .NET developer, but there wasn't, and maybe there is now, I'm not sure, but there wasn't a strong open source ethos to the .NET development community. But I picked up on Rails. A good friend of mine um, introduced me to Rails, and I just went, wow, I really like this. And this was Rails 0 point whatever, so
Mm-hmm.
early days. I tried to do some of the same stuff in .NET. It wasn't possible. The meta programming stuff wasn't there. I think it is now. Again, I haven't touched .NET since those days. I'm sure it's changed a hell of a lot. But yeah, got into Ruby, and about 6 months into that, I was working on a contract and I needed search. And Sphinx at the time was the new cool search tech, and I played with it a couple of the existing libraries, and they just didn't really gel for me. They were either extremely simple or they didn't integrate well into Rails, or they did, but not in a way that I liked, because I am opinionated, I guess, as many Ruby developers are. And so I set aside a weekend that was quite clearly my time as opposed to contracting time, and built the first version of Thinking Sphinx.
And at the time, did you have any idea that it would maybe turn into something more than just a side project that would help out your consulting work, or was it just something you wanted
No,
to do? Yeah. Well, and you
it just
obviously, I can say you did a great job because Sifter used Thinking Sphinx for ever. And,
yeah.
you obviously really, really did an amazing job, from maintenance standpoint, support, all that stuff. It was certainly one of the more positive experiences I've ever had working with such
Thank
a
you.
fairly complex technology.
Yeah, I mean, I, I'm certainly far more proud of the recent versions. That first version from that weekend, I think I rewrote within a few months because I quite clearly didn't understand Sphinx, and went suddenly, 3 months. Oh, that's different to this, and I need to do right, okay. So it's come a long way. But yeah, it had its ninth birthday back in August.
Wow.
So yeah, like, and the fact that so many people, particularly in the first 5 years of its life, jumped on board and went, yes, this is the thing we want to use. The number of contributors I've had is astounding. I'm really, really happy with how it's gone. But
So,
go
how
ahead.
long was it just a library before you decided to not necessarily launched Flying Sphinx, but before you decided, hey, this is something that could work?
Yeah. So it's probably 6 years ago, maybe a bit under that, where I knew that um, I really liked using Heroku for hosting, but Heroku is a very carefully managed system, and so Sphinx wasn't an option. Um, Maybe it's my stubborn side, but instead of using another tech that was available, I'm like, no, maybe I can make it work somehow. And initially, it was very much for my purpose,
Mm-hmm.
for my own apps, some of them personal apps, some of them customer apps. And then kind of went a bit down that path. I'm like, oh, well, I have had other people ask if they can use Sphinx on Heroku, and my answer has been no, sorry. It'd be nice to change that. and maybe they can pay for it. And then I need to figure out how much I'm charging and how I do with the infrastructure. And that took several months from like just figuring out the tech, rewriting the tech, because trying to work with Heroku's databases at the time was quite tricky. Now like a year in, it became far more easier, and I wish I didn't have to deal with
Well,
the old
that's the
stuff.
case with everything, though, right? Like, if
It
only
is,
I was launching Sifter today,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah, and then just got some people onto it and opened up the beta, and away it went.
So you were spending about 3 years on Thinking Sphinx before the idea of Flying Sphinx came along. And even when you got the idea for Flying Sphinx, it wasn't, I want to create a business. It was, I want to use, I want to use Sphinx on Heroku, and I can't.
Yep.
So, and then people were asking, hey, we would like to do that. And it's kind of pulling you along rather than you forcing an idea into a business. Is that
Sure.
fairly, that
Yep.
like, I love those stories because more often than not, like, those are the businesses that end up kind of getting going quick. Whereas so frequently one of the questions people ask is, how do I find customers? And it feels like the best way to do it is create something, help people, whatever it is, whether it's open source, a gem, or, it could be a Google Sheets that just happens to, really handle all your knowledge, and do it manually, let people ask you. And then, once you stop being able to serve those people, find a way to, serve them and then make enough money to support it and sustain it and keep going. It feels like it's the best way all around to do that. So as a Heroku add-on, it seems like you probably have some different challenges than traditional SaaS. You don't have some challenges that other people may have, like billing may be easier, but it probably still carries a lot of the uptime requirements and all that kind of stuff. How would you compare it to just a traditional app? How would you compare the two? What are the pros and cons? Would you suggest somebody else create a Heroku add-on or an add-on on a platform instead of creating a fully dedicated app, or is it kind of the best and worst of both worlds?
I mean, so one of the main advantages, as you mentioned, is the billing. I don't have to deal with billing. I occasionally have to deal with Salesforce, who pay me. So Heroku take their 30%, or Salesforce, however you want to draw it. Certainly Salesforce are the ones who manage the payments. And sometimes generally that goes all smoothly, but every couple of years it feels like they go and change their systems, and I have to deal with not getting paid for a while longer than I would like. But generally it's pretty smooth. And yeah, I don't have to deal with refunds. I don't have to deal with people's credit cards not working, invoices, none of that.
Yeah.
So it's like 30%. Well, that is a bit, but there's a whole lot of pain there that I don't have to deal with.
Yeah. What about support? Does that come into it too, or?
So Heroku are very good at integrating their add-on customers into their support system, and they will assign tickets to you, or to me. So like, this sounds like a Sphinx thing. Hey, Pat, your problem. And I'm sure they do the same with other add-on providers as well. And I have my own support system as well, but customers come through one or two of those channels generally. So support is normal, uptime is normal, and that's been a bit of a shift from just building apps to going, oh no, I have paying customers around the world in all time zones. Right, okay. And as a one-person business, there's only so much you can do, but it's a constant learning experience of like, okay. Yeah. So I for the last few years, I've had a cheap Nokia with a dedicated SIM that sits by my bed. And it comes with me on my travels, and it's always on. So that way I can, my main phone with all the different alerts it will have, personal and work-related, can be off. But if a server goes down, my Nokia makes a hell of a racket and wakes me up.
That's a really good idea. I think I thought about that in the past because I hated having to leave my phone on at night when the only alerts I cared about were really, really rare. But that's a really good idea, just to keep a cheap phone that just makes noise, and anything works with SMS and phone these days, with Pingdom or any of that. So that's a really, I probably should have thought about that a lot more. Um, so
I mean, it varies. I mean, I guess you've been building more of an app rather than infrastructure.
yeah, yeah. Well, and
So
that's
your customers' apps don't go down
yeah,
when your service goes down.
yeah. So infrastructure is a whole other level of stress, for
Yeah.
sure. Now that I'm at WildBit and helping out with Postmark and that sort of thing,
Yes.
when something goes wrong, it really, really ripples quick. Whereas with Sifter was down, it was an inconvenience and some people cared, but it wasn't like if their
Yeah.
whole product was offline because of,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So marketing, do you feel like being an add-on in Heroku really helps generate customers, or do you feel like customers already have, they want to use Sphinx and so they're going to use it? Does that help, or is it kind of a wash?
I have never done any sustained marketing.
Hmm.
Uh, I've done indirect in the way that like there's a talk I gave at a conference or two around
Hmm.
how I built it, and the infrastructure challenges of my own there and all that. And that probably helped make some people aware. But just generally going, when people go, hey, I'm using Thinking Sphinx and Sphinx, and I want to use Heroku, can I do that? I can now go,
Yes, you can.
yes, you can.
Okay. So a lot of it then
Um,
is
yeah,
existing
yeah.
awareness around it, and not necessarily Heroku bringing a whole slew of new potential customers. There's probably some, but
No, yeah, probably a handful, but like of the customers I have, I don't think that number's growing anymore. As from what I can see, it's probably slowly shrinking because Sphinx isn't new and cool and hot anymore, and then that's just tech.
yeah,
Um, but I would guess that all bar maybe one or two, if any, are using Ruby and Thinking Sphinx.
yeah, okay. Well, and I think my point there too is, you can imagine a lot of people being like, "Oh, if I create an add-on, then I don't have to worry about marketing because it'll just be there and people will use it." But
Yeah.
you wouldn't, I imagine, you wouldn't have counted on that as being your primary channel for finding customers and growing it.
Um, Not entirely. I mean, I knew that there were a lot of people out there who wanted to use Sphinx,
Yeah,
and Heroku, particularly when I first built it, was like the platform to get behind,
yeah,
especially if you didn't want to have to deal with your own infrastructure
yep,
costs yourself, or not directly. Um, yeah, so I knew that people were going to come and use it. I had no idea how many. Yeah, so it's just nice to have that growth, but I wouldn't just build an add-on and go, hey,
here it
cool,
is.
there
Yeah,
we go, done.
yeah.
It's to do something new. Yeah.
Looking over my questions. So what's your favorite part, like of building software, especially hosted software? What is it
Mm.
that is exciting about it to you? And not necessarily, it doesn't have to be the tech. I mean, it can be the technology, the people, the scale. Like for me with Sifter, the coolest thing was that you can build something and it can reach so many people. It's effectively, not infinite scale, but relative to any other business where you set up a shop in a small town, it can only reach the people in that town. But with
Yeah.
software online, you can reach and help, thousands of people with marginally more effort. So like, for instance, that was for me kind of what just always made it exciting is there's so many people out there to reach.
Yeah.
What is it for you that's been enjoyable or really relative to other types of work you've done?
From an enjoyable perspective, I think the ability to build, and I'm not saying I've hit these targets, but build elegant tools.
Yeah.
That's my joy in writing a whole lot of Ruby gems, and then Flying Sphinx as a service, trying to make the barrier of entry as low as possible, and making it a smooth experience for people. Yeah, and there is definitely room for improvement there,
Yeah.
but
Well, nothing's ever done, right?
no, for sure. And every now and then I'm like, okay, maybe I should rewrite Thinking Sphinx or refactor this and do that. And certainly with Flying Sphinx, I mean, as I mentioned, it's not really growing anymore.
Hmm.
So putting more time into the business probably isn't wise. But every now and then it's like, no, I need to fix that bit. I need to change that bit. So I still
Yeah.
jump in and do things for sure.
It's, I feel like it was always a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing that there's always something to work on. There's a curse that always there was something to be working on. So you could never
Yeah,
be
yeah,
like, I'm done, I can relax. Because as soon
yeah,
as you ship something, even that thing's going to have maintenance and support. And then there's the next thing
Yeah.
on your list. And so
Mhm.
I feel like software is a very difficult business to say, I've done all the things, what's next? It's just,
Yeah.
constantly just trying to stay afloat. So,
Yeah.
um, so having done a lot of support for open source and very
Mhm.
excellent support, I might add, how would you say that
Thank you.
compares to supporting a paid product? Is it better, easier, worse, about the same? And the reason, for a little more context, a lot of people I
Yeah.
know with SaaS are worried about if I launch an app on the side, how am I going to find time to answer all the emails and do all the support and manage all of that? And I think I know I was worried about it when I originally got started, and I hear a lot of people kind of, that's their fears. Like, well, I've got a full-time job. How am I going to manage that?
Yeah. I mean, there are strong overlaps, I guess, between the open source support and the SaaS support. Um, uh, I will sometimes drop things for SaaS support. But it depends what the customer needs. If they're just like, oh, things are a bit slow, then it might not be an urgent issue. I might have a quick look and go, okay, I'm going to have to come back to you. And sometimes there's time zones involved, and generally customers are extremely understanding about that, which is great. But for the most part, it's like people are irritated that something's not working, and you want to help them. And I think it's more something about open source than it is about SaaS, is that sometimes people get really annoyed, really frustrated, really angry. And I feel that's maybe a little more warranted with SaaS because they're paying for the
Yeah,
service. Open source, they're not. And it's kind of like, well, is there some entitlement issues there, which that's a whole nother
it
talk.
is.
I've actually presented at a couple of conferences covering that and a bunch of other stuff around open source lately. So I've been thinking about that a bit. But yeah, look, for people who are going into it and thinking, oh, this might take up a lot of my time, if you have a decent amount of confidence around how you build things and you feel they're generally pretty stable, then if you've got a lot of people contacting you, that either means that one, you've misjudged how stable it is, which is okay because you can fix that hopefully pretty easily,
Hmm.
or two, you've got a lot of customers coming in, right? Because you wouldn't expect to have contact with most of your customers.
Yeah.
Mostly you'd expect the documentation and the service itself to help them step through what they need to do. So if you've got a lot of people jumping in and hassling you, that probably means you're quite successful,
Yeah.
which is a nice problem to have. Now, whether you want that success is up to you. You might be like, well, I actually like my main job and this was just something fun. Every person's going to have to deal with that their own way, I think.
Did you anticipate Flying Sphinx being a significant thing, or was your hope always, it'll be cool if this, helps pay rent, or, did you have high hopes for it, or just, I'm doing this anyways, so cool if I can make money off of it and it can pay some bills as well and help me reinvest
Yeah.
time into the whole project?
It has varied over time. Certainly when I started, I think I have one friend in particular, Steve Hopkins, who currently works for a company called Culture Amp in San Francisco, but he is from Melbourne, where I am. But he lived in Sydney for a few years, and I was up there visiting for a conference and staying with him, and had told him about, I wouldn't mind maybe building this thing, Heroku Sphinx, blah, blah, blah. And he's not a developer, but he's not only an excellent friend, he's a smart business person and culture and people person. And he's like, okay, so what are you doing tomorrow? And I'm like, the conference is over. I might just chill, wander around Sydney or whatever. He's like, no. You've just told me what you're doing tomorrow. You're sitting down and you're working on this thing, and I will buy you all the hot chocolates you need because I don't drink
Yeah.
coffee. And, you will start on it. And I'm like, okay, right. And it's so great to have, I think Steve spotted the potential of it more than I did at
Okay.
that point. But over the years, or even just within that first year, I guess, it's kind of like, okay, is this something that's useful for me? And then you look at the costs and you're like, well, I hope it's useful for at least a handful of other people. And then it starts building and you're like, oh no, okay, I can make a little bit of money off it. And I still make a bit of money off it, not enough to live off, but it pays for itself and then some.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Well, it's funny because it feels like so many business. There's kind of two things that made me think of, and there's so many businesses that are kind of accidental businesses. They weren't really. It was just, oh, hey, people like this, and there's something there, and it just kind of snowballs until it becomes something. And then there's the things where people have an idea, and it could very well be a viable business, but it just kind of stays in that idea phase because there's no tipping point. There's no spark that makes them go, you know what, I'm just going to sit down and do it. And I think a lot of that is fear that I have to commit to this huge, big undertaking and set aside 6 months of my life or I'll never be able to pull it off. But the reality is, like, there's always something you can build and start with, and then just step by step, make it a little more advanced or whatever. So it's
certainly, sorry.
It's just awesome to see that story play out over and over again for so many people. And it's funny to me how frequently that's how it unfolds.
Yeah. I mean, I have another, I guess, infrastructure as a service kind of thing, called Drumknot, named after a Terry Pratchett character. And it is hosted search, of course, for Jekyll sites, because they're static hosted pages. Yep. And it's like, well, I want to put my blog onto Jekyll, but I feel like given so much of what I've done over the past 10 years is search, I should probably have search on my site. So how do I do this? So I ended up building this service. And initially I just built it for me.
Yep.
And then early this year, I actually had the time to actually put in all the billing code and the invoicing code. And, none of that was big. And I'd done that for contracting projects before as well. So I had some familiarity there, but I have one customer besides myself.
Okay.
And again, I haven't put any time into marketing, and it is probably even more niche than Sphinx itself. But kind of, okay, well, I do it for myself, and I have one person paying $3 a month that slightly offsets my own costs.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to get a whole bunch of support in the middle of the night on that. So.
No, right. And it also means that I've done the hard yards now for my own project, like the whole billing and invoicing side of things. So I can, and I actually open sourced the code for that. So not even just I can take it and use it somewhere else, but somebody else can do so as well.
Yeah. Right on. Okay.
Whether the code's any good,
I'm sure it is.
It's tested.
So if they're, I think this probably is going to vary based on the type of project, but if somebody else had an open source project they were passionate about, but maybe they felt like they wanted to dedicate more time to it, but obviously it's kind of a catch-22 because everybody still has to make a living one way or another. A lot of people, I think, they might be passionate about their project to say, how can I go ahead and start, evolve this into some sort of business? So search, that dovetails nicely with Heroku. Are there other things or other just tips you've thought of or encountered or learned that you would have for other people who are in a similar situation that want to take their open source project and turn it into something a little, something more core that they can spend time on and make a living off of?
It's a tricky one because, as you say, it's going to be different with every type of project, right? I mean, you look at Mike Perham, who's built Sidekick up and made, a nice bit of money through it, and which is fantastic because it's a great project and I use it all the time. Although I personally haven't had something where I'm paying for it, so it's all very well for me to support these things, but I'm not doing everything in my own power to support them either.
Yeah.
It feels like generally I wouldn't set your sights too high, because some projects, like I've written tons and tons of open source code, and I've had one big hit. And I am extremely lucky to have had that. It just happened to be right place, right time, really. Not everyone's going to have even one big hit.
Yeah.
So looking at your open source projects and your open source code and kind of going, I want to make that my even some income on the side, it's a big ask.
Yeah.
If you've got something that is related to infrastructure, then I feel that that's an easier step to make. If you've got something that's just popular in some way, then again, that's easier to make the step. But I think some of it's going to come down to more having the support of your employer, or your clients. I mean, I was working with the development team for a few years here in Melbourne called Inspire 9 Development, and generally when we built things for our clients, we'd see patterns that we'd been doing in different projects, and it's like, right, that is not core to the product, so we can open source it. And we just open sourced a hell of a lot of stuff. Like most of it, I don't think anybody else is using because we didn't really promote it. But the team that I worked with were very supportive of going, is that generic? Sure, make it open source.
Yeah.
And if people have questions about it, sure, spend a bit of time helping them.
Yeah. So kind of default to open, and then if there's a reason to keep it private, keep it private. Otherwise, put it out there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But just having an employee who's like, look, you want to spend a bit of time on open source. We know that feeds your passion. We know that helps our code.
Yeah.
Go for it. And that's a big ask for employers, don't get me wrong.
Oh, yeah.
But
not the right ones.
We have such a... Well, yeah, I mean,
it is tough, though. There's a lot of legal implications.
The smaller businesses, right. Not everyone's a Heroku or a GitHub with tons of cash to kind of go, sure. We'll hire people just to do open source.
Yeah.
I think I've lost my train of thought a little bit there, but I think that the gist is...
There's a lot to it. And I think probably one of the bigger things is just, it's the same for any business, is make sure that you have business customers, right? And so if it's an infrastructure project that you're working on, there's a chance that, business could leverage that, then there's value in it. And there's surely a way you can, like you said with Mike, who I'm supposed to talk to, I think later in the week, actually, about how can you tier it such that there's still value in the open source, but then find a way for the enterprises that are really getting a lot of value out of the project to pay for it and contribute back into it. And in a way, it turns into this virtuous cycle, and it allows you to improve the project, and everybody wins.
Yeah.
So, but just like anything else, there still has to be some business viability there so it can sustain itself.
Yeah, for
sure. So we're coming up close to the end, and I think the last question is, if you could do it all over again. And this is kind of twofold, and you can answer either way, is kind of what was the most painful thing that you've dealt with, and what would you do differently to fix that pain or avoid it entirely?
So I mentioned the database issues earlier. That may have been the biggest pain point. In a way that it's far more visible, I guess. There are probably things with my choices of how I've built Flying Sphinx over the years that just little bits of pain here and there, but that one was a bit more sustained. And that was that the original Postgres databases on Heroku, you couldn't access externally. And Sphinx, at least in the feature set it had available then, had to talk to your database. Had to make SQL queries direct to either MySQL or Postgres database. So what I ended up having to do, initially I looked into using RDS, and it was only MySQL at that point in time, and I switched a couple of projects over while I was building out the infrastructure, and I went, oh wait, I just got a bill for Amazon, and I can't ask my customers my potential customers at that point to spend $80 a month just to have a database when they get it for free with
Yeah.
Heroku. So what I was doing instead was doing a reverse SSH proxy back to my servers, and then my servers could connect through, like from your app, and then my servers could connect through your app to your database. And it worked. It wasn't as, like, the tweaks I made along the way to make it a little bit faster, but it wasn't elegant by any means, obviously, nor ideal, but it worked. And then, of course, about a year in, Heroku, like, oh no, we're doing a new version of our databases and it allows external access. It's just like that. That would have been really nice a year ago. We've removed so many because I brainstormed with in this co-working space with my peers around, like, right, this is a problem. One of them's a network engineer, and he's like, well, you could try this, you could try that, and other smart people are putting in thoughts, and that, like, all of that was amazing.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Oh, we lost you there for a second.
And put it all together, and oh, don't worry, I was just the frustration of having
Yeah.
all of that.
No, and I think in a way, I think that's a good anecdote because there's so many things that when you're building something, it's so easy to hit it and just be like, this is ridiculous. How am I ever going to get around this? Like, it's so easy to let it just really, really drag you down when, there's just too many things you have to fight through like that to make anything work, right? If it's not that, it's something else, whether it's credit card fraud or, whatever it is. There's always something that's going to kind of really, really suck the life out of you and really, like, take the wind out of the sails on a project. And I think too often, like, I know no matter how much I know that, when that happens to me in a project, it's just like, all right, I got to take a day off. Like, I'm defeated. I give up.
Yeah.
Like, we all deal with that, right? Like, that's just the nature of software. So it's nice to know nice for everybody to know that it's not always smooth sailing, I guess, is where I'm going with that for sure. So that's really kind of the gist of it. Is there anything else you want to share about your experiences or any random anecdotes that people have heard you tell before? And they're like, oh my gosh, that's so fascinating. Anything like that you want to?
No, nothing comes to mind at this point.
All right, that's fair. Well, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I think there's a lot of good anecdotes in here and insight for people, so I really appreciate it.
No problem. Happy to have the chat.
Yeah.